Do you have a fascination with modern warfare that lacks any real depth or history knowledge and just results in you wearing dirty old gas masks and disappointing your parents? Are you a fan of black metal but are put off by its terrible production and recording quality, so instead want to opt for something that's somehow even worse? Do you enjoy the musical equivalent of a blocked toilet? If so, war metal might be the perfect genre for you. Spoiler alert, it's an extremely niche micro-genre inspired by black and death metal, but it has the word metal in it, so come on piggies, come to the trough, enjoy your metal themed slop. I know you're hungry, it's been a while. War metal can be a little bit confusing, mainly because it's referred to by a few different names, by a few different people, but other people within the same community will throw a hissy fit if you misgender a genre that just sounds like a clogged drain to 90% of the population. So many refer to war metal as bestial black metal, although there is a small difference, with the subject of this video, war metal, aligning itself more so with grindcore and death metal influences. That may seem extremely confusing as I haven't actually described what war metal is as of yet, so let's ignore my horrendous video structure and get into the genre conventions of war metal. So war metal is heavily inspired by black metal and lifts a lot of the conventions and overall style of the genre, such as painting your face like a toddler whilst exhibiting behaviour that should realistically keep you at least 2 miles away from any toddler. In all seriousness, a lot of the elements of black metal that are utilised within this genre are picked more so from the first wave scene than the second wave that remains iconic thanks to this motherfucker, with a lot of the atmosphere utilised within the second wave scene being replaced with abrupt loud noises and sudden solos that oftentimes make zero sense structurally. Production wise, the genre follows the trend of black metal by purposely making it sound like shit. Aside from that, war metal takes a lot of inspiration more so from the death metal side of things, with the violent ear-piercing shrieks of regular black metal being replaced with a guttural style that requires too much testosterone for a typical black metal singer to be able to pull off. Guitarists within war metal also utilize a deeper guitar tone as opposed to the dying fox tone that's utilized in black metal. So right now, war metal probably just sounds like a vague crossover between black and death metal, but that is doing it a little bit of a disservice, as the main characteristic that makes war metal unique is the sheer chaos that ensues every time you listen to a song. This genre can become so violent, fast, raw and chaotic that it often sounds more akin to grindcore in its subgenres than a typical black or death metal song from the 90s. You can probably already guess what lyrical themes are present within war metal. Key is in the name, although it's often presented in such a ridiculously over-the-top way that it seems more so like a joke than an actual comment on warfare. The lyricism is also presented in a very black metal-y way, with everything somehow being related to Satan or Satanism, although being performed by a in a gas mask. Speaking of gas masks, it's probably worth commenting on the visual presentation of war metal. Corpse paint is commonly utilised, where white face paint is worn, with the goal being to look like a corpse, you know, typical black metal bullshit. What's unique about the presentation of war metal, however, is the fact that many artists will actually dress in literal fucking battle gear. Well, I'd say battle gear, but I think anyone going into battle wearing this bollocks is immediately getting murked. So how did this happen? How has a micro-genre that is so similar in style to many other subgenres become so revered by individuals who actively avoid sunlight? So in order to explore the precursors of war metal, we need to look towards some of the more extreme examples of music and artists that would go on to inspire the eventual black metal and grindcore scenes. Despite Sodom mainly being known for their thrash stylings later in their career, their distorted speed and vocal style would go on to not only influenced pioneers within the Norwegian scene such as Euronymous, but also pioneers specifically in war metal such as Blasphemy, with there actually being theories that an early Sodom song actually inspired the name Blasphemy. Another band that is said to have a release that is proto-war metal is Sarcophago's INRI, released in 1987. The album would be arguably the most brutal sound from an early black metal release, despite the fact that they actually labeled themselves death metal. The album would combine the early sound of black metal with thrash and speed elements, essentially becoming something else entirely. Another early band that would go on to inspire the more grindy elements of war metal would be Germany's Blood, being perhaps the earliest band to combine death metal and grindcore, which would go on to inspire a lot of the musical elements of the eventual inventors of war metal, Blasphemy. So when you hear the term black metal, your immediate thought is likely the second wave in Norway, and despite the fact it's extremely iconic for many different reasons, it wasn't the only black metal scene at the time time, taking direct inspiration from the first wave with bands like Venom. Specifically, bands within North America were taking the brutality and intensity of the first wave and pushing the confrontational aspects while stripping back the focus on atmosphere and melody that is seen in the Norwegian scene. So what you're left with is a fast-paced, intense, heavily distorted, muddy mess. And speaking of a distorted, muddy mess, Blasphemy. Blasphemy would take the intensity of bands like Sarcophago and push it to its limit, with a further focus on speed, distorted low end, and perhaps the most heinous production and recording quality I've ever heard. Beherit would join the degeneracy shortly after with another debut project that focuses on extreme distortion and intensity, so intense in fact that shortly after the band would down or perhaps upgrade to a one-man dark ambient project, which is the fate of any metal musician who gets a little bit too silly. Other bands like Arch Goat, Goat Penis and Goat Blood would push forwards the style, introducing warlike lyricism with a heavy focus on just continuously referencing wartime equipment. Despite the fact that this first wave of war metal wasn't really considered a wave until sweaty nerds on the internet got their grubby mitts on metal forums, what can be considered a second wave would actually begin in the late 90s, with bands essentially just pushing forwards every single aspect of the original war metal sound. This includes its intensity, chaos, noise, atmosphere, speed, and anything you can think of, might as well chuck it in the stew. This second wave would essentially begin with the release of Conquerors, War Cult Supremacy. The band took the sounds within the first wave and made it so relentlessly brutal that it essentially lacks any musical aspect and is just noise. Drums are ridiculously distorted, vocals are borderline feral, and the guitar sounds more like a piece of heavy machinery than an instrument. Imagine all of these elements being melded together so poorly that it's almost impossible to hear any distinct aspect. That is Conqueror. Of course, music of this variety is destined to remain underground and be gatekept by rancid individuals who can't help but to continuously invent new micro-genres whenever they see a slight difference in a style of already extremely niche music, and this obviously remains the case for war metal, with the already microscopic genre splitting itself into increasingly stupid subgenres. The first two are relatively simple. War Death introduces more elements of death metal such as lower tunings, lower pitched quote-unquote vocals, a heavier focus on actual musical elements such as riffs and melodies, and production that actually leaves the music audible. Examples include Antichrist Siege Machine and Gravesend. Next up is War Grind, which is, you guessed it, war with a further emphasis on grindcore, essentially the complete opposite of War Death, less melodic, faster, with worse production, although in most cases actually sounds much better. Naked Whipper would be a prominent early example, with the album Pain Streaks, which is so weirdly produced and recorded it remains a regular listen for me just out of pure curiosity and intrigue. You may think War Grind is the nastiest this genre can sound, but nope, because for some reason somebody decided to invent war noise, which is so ridiculously extreme it barely even resembles music anymore. Whether this be on purpose or just due to incompetence is usually case by case. War metal is a subgenre that never really saw the same commercial success as similarly distorted messes such as grindcore and some of death and black metal, which honestly makes perfect sense. Around the time of its inception, its entire niche was being overshadowed by a bunch of Norwegian edgelords burning down churches and playing with the snow. This in turn essentially blacklisted any genre with similar ideas or conventions from receiving any mainstream attention. This can be seen as both a bad and a good thing. Bad in the fact that none of the artists were able to make a large amount of money, and good in the fact that it was never forced to dampen its extreme sound to appeal to an audience that's more mainstream. If anything, the genre has only become more distorted and rancid as time has progressed. It seems to be a genre that's just created because the creator had an urge to create, or because they want to be perceived as cool by the crust goth girl that has so many facial piercings that their head has become a higher percentage metal than bone or cartilage.